The morning frost painted New York City's windows in delicate white patterns as temperatures dropped to record lows. Outside a busy supermarket in Queens, James Wilson tightened his worn military jacket around his shoulders, his breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. At 75 years old, the Vietnam veteran's steps were slower than they used to be, each movement a reminder of shrapnel still embedded in his right leg. Inside the supermarket, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as a crowd of customers rushed through their morning shopping. The warmth hit James's face as he entered, his weathered hands gripping a small shopping basket. His monthly Social Security check had arrived yesterday, and he needed to make it stretch as far as possible. The supermarket's digital clock showed 8:45 a.m. The morning rush was in full swing. James moved carefully between the aisles, his limp more pronounced in the cold weather. His fingers, stiff from arthritis, carefully selected each item: bread, milk, eggs, and the cheapest coffee he could find. He didn't notice the impatient glances from other shoppers as he double-checked prices, counting every cent in his head. The total needed to stay under $43.78. Every penny mattered. The checkout line stretched long, filled with professionals checking their watches and parents hurrying their children along. James chose the shortest line, not realizing this decision would turn a simple morning shopping trip into something that would shake the entire community. Behind the register, Ayanna Matthews drummed her perfectly manicured nails on the counter, her face already set in an expression of irritation that would soon transform this ordinary winter morning into anything but ordinary. Those who passed James in the aisle saw only an elderly man in a faded military jacket, but his story ran far deeper. After 3 tours in Vietnam, James had returned home with more than just physical scars. The shrapnel in his leg served as a constant reminder of the sacrifice he made for his country, though nowadays most people rush past him without a second glance. His wife, Margaret, had passed away 2 years ago, leaving him to navigate life's challenges alone in their small apartment a few blocks away. The supermarket bustled with its usual morning energy. Young professionals clutched their coffee cups. Construction workers grabbed quick breakfasts, and mothers steered shopping carts while managing energetic children. The overhead speakers crackled with announcements about special offers, mixing with the beeping of scanners and the rustle of shopping bags. For James, each sound bounced off the walls a little too loudly, a remnant of his time near artillery fire. His shopping basket grew heavier as he added each carefully selected item. The weight pulled at his right shoulder, forcing him to switch hands more frequently than he would have liked. But James wouldn't take a cart. Those were for bigger shops, and he knew his limits. Besides, the exercise, though painful, helped keep him mobile, just as his VA doctor had recommended. The store had changed significantly since James first started shopping there 15 years ago. Self-checkout machines now lined one wall, though he avoided them after a confusing incident last month. The old-timers who used to run the registers, who knew him by name and would ask about his day, had all retired or moved on. Now, younger staff members buzzed around with tablets, too busy to notice the elderly veteran moving carefully through their aisles. Today, the store seemed particularly crowded. A sale on winter essentials had drawn more customers than usual, creating a maze of shopping carts and hurried people. James navigated through them carefully, apologizing softly when his slower pace caused others to wait or step around him. A young mother with 2 children offered him a kind smile as he let them pass, but most others simply rushed by, absorbed in their phones or their own morning routines. As James approached the checkout lines, he could see Ayanna Matthews at Register 3. Even from a distance, her impatience was visible in the way she scanned items and handled customers' groceries. Her long nails tapped an irritated rhythm on her scanner, and her sighs grew louder with each transaction that took longer than she deemed necessary. James chose her line because it was shortest, unaware that this simple choice would set in motion events that would change not just his morning, but the lives of everyone present in the store. James reached Ayanna's register, placing his basket carefully on the counter. The morning fluorescent lights caught the slight tremor in his hands as he began unloading his groceries. Ayanna Matthews barely glanced up, her fingers flying across the scanner with practice speed. Her name tag gleamed under the lights, positioned above a trainee manager badge she received last week, a promotion that seemed to fuel her sense of authority. The first signs of trouble appeared when James's item slowed Ayanna's rapid-fire scanning rhythm. He had arranged his groceries meticulously, wanting to keep his cold items together, but Ayanna rearranged them impatiently, disrupting his careful organization. A gallon of milk nearly toppled as she pushed it too quickly across the scanner, and James reached out with weathered hands to steady it. The line behind James grew longer. A businessman in an expensive suit checked his watch repeatedly, while a young woman scrolled through her phone, occasionally glancing up with poorly concealed frustration. Ayanna's scanning grew more aggressive with each item, her movements sharp and irritated. The beeping of her scanner seemed to grow louder, more accusatory with each pass. When all items were scanned, the total flashed on the screen, $41.23. James reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out an aged leather wallet. The businessman behind him let out an audible sigh as James carefully opened it, revealing a small collection of carefully folded bills and loose change. Ayanna's perfectly manicured nails resumed their impatient tapping on the counter. James began counting his money slowly, his fingers slightly stiff from the morning cold. Each bill needed to be checked twice. His eyesight wasn't what it used to be. A 20 first, then a 10, then 5 ones. Each bill smoothed carefully before being placed on the counter. Ayanna's eye roll was barely concealed as she watched him count. The remaining $6.23 would need to come from his change. James pulled out a small coin purse, his fingers working carefully to open the clasp. A quarter slipped from his grasp, rolling across the counter. Ayanna snatched it up with visible annoyance, her customer service smile now completely gone. The businessman behind James spoke into his phone, loudly rescheduling a morning meeting. More customers joined the line, their collective impatience creating a palpable tension in the air. A child asked his mother why the old man was taking so long. The mother hushed him, but her own expression showed similar frustration. James could feel their stares as he continued counting quarters, dimes, and nickels, each coin representing a small portion of his carefully budgeted monthly allowance. Ayanna's composure finally broke. She leaned forward, her voice carrying clearly across the checkout area. "Sir, we have other customers waiting. If you can't count your money quickly enough, maybe you should use the self-checkout next time. Or better yet, shop when the store isn't so busy." Her words cut through the background noise of the store, sharp and deliberate. James paused in his counting, his face flushing with embarrassment. He'd lost track of his total and would need to start again. Behind him, someone muttered about elderly people during rush hour, while others shifted impatiently. The businessman stepped out of line, moving to another register with an exaggerated gesture of frustration. The dignity James had carried with him through war, through loss, through countless challenges, began to crack under the weight of public humiliation. His fingers trembled more noticeably as he started counting his coins again. But what nobody in line knew, what Ayanna couldn't see through her veil of impatience, was that in the far corner of the store, someone had been watching this entire scene unfold. Someone whose presence was about to transform this moment of cruelty into something entirely unexpected. Ayanna's patience had completely evaporated as James started his third attempt at counting coins. Her fingers now drummed against the register with increased intensity, each tap echoing his mounting anxiety. The store's background noise seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of metal coins touching the counter and Ayanna's exaggerated sighs. A manager's badge had given Ayanna a taste of authority, and she intended to use it. She leaned forward again, her voice dripping with condescension. "Sir, at this rate, we'll be here until closing time. There's a bank down the street that can count your change for you." Several customers in line snickered at her comment, adding to James's humiliation. James's weathered hands began to shake more visibly. A few coins slipped from his grasp, scattering across the counter and onto the floor. As he instinctively moved to retrieve them, pain shot through his injured leg. He gripped the counter for support, his breath catching slightly. Ayanna made no move to help, instead throwing her hands up in theatrical frustration. The young mother who had smiled at James earlier stepped forward, bending to help collect the fallen coins. But Ayanna's sharp voice stopped her. "Please stay in line, ma'am. We have procedures for handling money, and we don't want anyone accused of taking anything." The mother stepped back, her face flushing with embarrassment at the implied accusation. James felt the sting of shame deepen as he slowly straightened up. Coins still scattered on the floor. Ayanna reached for her phone under the counter, her voice carrying deliberately across the checkout area. "Security to Register 3. We have a situation that's disrupting service." The word situation hung in the air, transforming James from a veteran who had served his country into an inconvenience that needed to be removed. A small crowd had gathered now, some filming with their phones, others whispering among themselves. James could hear fragments of their conversations. Holding up the line, should shop at different hours, probably confused. Each comment drove the stake of humiliation deeper. His military training had taught him to stand tall under fire, but this battlefield of judgment and disdain was testing his resilience in ways combat never had. Ayanna continued her psychological assault, speaking loudly to no one in particular. "You know, my grandfather was a veteran too, and he never made excuses. He adapted to civilian life just fine." The false comparison hung in the air like poison, suggesting that James's struggle was a personal failure rather than a legitimate challenge. The security guard, a young man named Mike, approached cautiously. He'd been watching the situation unfold and seemed uncomfortable with his assigned role in this drama. Ayanna straightened up, her authority seemingly magnified by the guard's presence. "This gentleman is holding up the entire line and refusing to complete his transaction in a timely manner," she announced, as if reading from an incident report. James's fingers closed around his wallet, his knuckles white with tension. The military jacket that had always brought him a sense of pride now felt like a target on his back. He began gathering his coins with as much dignity as he could muster, each movement measured despite his trembling hands. The morning sun had risen higher now, streaming through the store's front windows and casting long shadows across the checkout area. In that same beam of sunlight, a figure moved quietly through the gathered crowd. The person's presence was subtle at first, but there was something about their deliberate movement that drew attention. A few customers noticed, their phones slowly lowering as they recognized who was approaching. Ayanna, caught up in her display of authority, didn't notice the shift in the crowd's attention. She was too busy making a show of checking her watch and announcing loudly, "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. We can't hold up paying customers any longer." She reached for James's groceries, intending to remove them from the counter. That's when a hand gently came to rest on her reaching arm, stopping its motion. A calm but firm voice cut through the tension. "Those groceries aren't going anywhere." The crowd fell silent as Ayanna looked up, her expression of authority dissolving into shock as she recognized the face of the man who had interrupted her power play. Standing there in a simple black t-shirt and jeans was Keanu Reeves, his presence transforming the entire atmosphere of the store in an instant. The supermarket fell into a profound silence, broken only by the soft hum of refrigeration units and distant register beeps. Keanu Reeves stood beside James, his presence both calming and commanding. He wore no disguise, no attempt to hide his identity, just a simple black t-shirt, jeans, and that unmistakable gentle demeanor that had made him beloved worldwide. Ayanna's face cycled through emotions, shock, embarrassment, and a desperate attempt to regain composure. Her hand retreated from James's groceries, as if they'd suddenly become electrified. The security guard took a step back, clearly unsure of his role in this transformed situation. The phones recording the scene of humiliation now captured something entirely different. Keanu turned first to James, his voice carrying a warmth that had been absent from the previous confrontation. "Please, Take your time, sir. There's no rush. He reached down, gathering the scattered coins with a respect that made the simple act feel like an honor rather than a task. James watched, his eyes glistening with emotion as this famous actor knelt to collect his dropped change. The crowd that had gathered shifted uncomfortably, many now hiding their phones, ashamed of their earlier judgment. The businessman who had switched lines earlier slipped quietly toward the store's exit. Keanu rose slowly, placing the collected coins carefully on the counter before James. Their eyes met briefly, a veteran's quiet dignity recognizing genuine respect. Keanu then turned to Diana, who had begun nervously adjusting her name tag and manager's badge. His voice remained calm but carried an authority that filled the space. I've been standing over there for the past 10 minutes, watching how you treated this gentleman. Would you treat your own grandfather this way? The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Diana stammered, her earlier confidence evaporating. Mr. Reeves, we have procedures and the morning rush. Her words trailed off as Keanu raised his hand gently, stopping her mid-sentence. The morning rush seemed trivial now. Her procedures, hollow excuses for cruelty. The actor's next words carried across the now silent store. This man served our country. He carried wounds that still pain him today, so you could stand here in safety and judge him for being a few minutes slower than you'd like. Each word was measured, not angry but heavy with truth. Some customers nodded in agreement. Others looked at their feet, recognition of their own complicity in the scenario washing over them. James stood straighter now, his military bearing returning as dignity replaced humiliation. Keanu continued, addressing not just Diana but the entire store. The measure of our society isn't how quickly we can move through a checkout line. It's how we treat each other, especially those who sacrifice for us. Diana's eyes had begun to fill with tears, not from fear of consequences, but from genuine realization. Her badge, which minutes ago had been a symbol of authority, now felt like a weight. The previous silence of the crowd had transformed from judgment of James to reflection on their own behavior. Keanu reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet. I'd like to pay for these groceries, he announced, but James raised his hand in polite refusal. Thank you, but no, the veteran said, his voice steady now. I can pay for my own groceries. All I needed was a little patience and respect. The words carried no bitterness, only wisdom. The moment stretched, heavy with meaning. Customers who had been impatiently checking their watches now stood still, witnessing something more valuable than saved time. The young mother who had tried to help earlier wiped tears from her eyes, holding her children closer. Even the store's background music seemed to have quieted in reverence to the scene unfolding. Keanu nodded in understanding at James's refusal of financial help, respecting the veteran's dignity. Instead, he stayed beside him as James resumed counting his coins, this time without trembling hands. The actor's presence transformed what had been a moment of shame into one of honor. Each coin placed on the counter now rang with purpose rather than embarrassment, telling a story not of slowness, but of independence, dignity, and the right to take one's time in a world too rushed to care. The store manager, alerted by the unusual silence in his typically bustling supermarket, emerged from his office. David Fleming, a man in his mid-40s wearing a crisp white shirt and store-issued tie, walked briskly toward Register 3. The crowd parted automatically, giving him a clear view of the scene. Keanu Reeves standing beside an elderly veteran, Diana looking thoroughly chastened, and a collection of coins still being carefully counted on the counter. David processed the situation quickly, his eyes widening as he recognized both the famous actor and the gravity of the situation. Before he could speak, Keanu addressed him directly. Your employee here seems to need a refresher course in basic human dignity. I watched her publicly humiliate this gentleman, Mr. James Wilson, a veteran who served our country, simply because he needed an extra moment to count his change. The manager's face flushed as he absorbed the information. Diana seemed to shrink behind her register as her supervisor turned toward her. Diana, is this true? David asked, though the question was largely rhetorical. The dozens of phones that had recorded the incident left little room for denial. Ayanna's voice quivered as she responded. I was trying to keep the line moving efficiently. The morning rush. Her words faded as Keanu interjected, his tone remaining measured but firm. Efficiency without compassion is just another form of cruelty. Every person in this line, including you, might one day move a little slower, need a little more time. Would you want to be treated this way? David Fleming straightened his tie, a nervous habit, before addressing James directly. Sir, on behalf of our entire store, I want to express my deepest apologies. This is not how we train our staff to behave, and this is certainly not how we treat our veterans, or any customer. His words carried sincerity, but also the weight of knowing this incident could have serious repercussions for the store. The crowd had grown larger now, with customers from other areas of the store drawn to the scene. Some were still recording, while others listened intently, caught up in this unexpected morning drama. Keanu used a moment to address the broader issue. You know what's interesting? None of us were born knowing how to count change quickly. None of us were born running. We all had to learn, to grow, and someday, we'll all need others to show us patience. Ayanna's tears were flowing freely now, her earlier arrogance replaced by genuine remorse. She stepped out from behind her register, removing her name badge as she did so. Mr. Wilson, she began, her voice shaking, I was cruel and thoughtless. My behavior was inexcusable. My own grandfather was a veteran, and I dishonored his memory today with my actions. James, who had remained dignified throughout the confrontation, turned to face her. His response carried the wisdom of his years. Young lady, the true measure of a person isn't in never making mistakes. It's in how they handle themselves after those mistakes are made. What matters now is what you learn from this moment. David Fleming, recognizing the need for immediate action, announced clearly, Ayanna, please report to my office after we resolve the situation. And Mr. Wilson, sir, while I know this doesn't make up for your experience, I want you to know that we will be implementing mandatory sensitivity training for all our staff, starting this week. The morning sun continued to stream through the store's windows, now illuminating a scene of transformation rather than humiliation. What had started as a moment of cruelty had become an unexpected lesson in compassion, dignity, and the power of standing up for what's right. The line of customers, once impatient and judgmental, now stood in respectful silence, witnesses to something far more valuable than saved time. The moment of confrontation gave way to a wave of positive action throughout the store. David Fleming, taking control of the situation, reopened his register personally to handle James's transaction. His movements were deliberate and respectful as he helped James complete his purchase, treating each coin with the dignity it deserved. The previous tension in the air had transformed into something more hopeful. Ayanna remained nearby, her manager's badge now tucked away in her pocket, watching as James finally completed his purchase. The transaction that had caused so much turmoil was finished with the respect it should have had from the beginning. The total matched exactly $41.23, each coin contributing to a lesson none present would soon forget. Keanu stayed close to James, engaging him in conversation as his groceries were carefully bagged. Their discussion turned to James's service, his life after the military, and the small apartment where he now lived alone. The actor listened intently, showing genuine interest in the veteran's stories, creating a moment of connection that transcended celebrity and status. The other customers, previously part of the problem, began to demonstrate remarkable changes in their behavior. Those still in line insisted that James shouldn't carry his groceries alone. A young man in workout gear offered to help carry the bags to James's apartment. Others stepped forward with their own apologies for their earlier impatience. David Fleming seized the opportunity to address his entire staff, calling them together near the registers. His voice carried clearly as he announced immediate changes to store policy. Starting today, We're designating Register 1 as a priority lane for elderly customers, veterans, and anyone who needs additional time or assistance. This isn't just about business. It's about being human. The store's atmosphere had completely shifted. Customers who had been rushing through their morning now lingered, caught up in the moment of community that was unfolding. The young mother who had tried to help earlier approached James with her children, who listened wide-eyed as he briefly shared a story about his military service. Ayanna, still visibly shaken but showing signs of genuine transformation, asked her manager if she could be part of developing the new sensitivity training program. Her request came with a humble acknowledgement that her experience today would be valuable in teaching others what not to do. David Fleming nodded approvingly, recognizing the potential for growth from this difficult situation. The security guard, Mike, who had been called to remove James earlier, now stood at attention and offered a respectful salute to the veteran. This simple gesture of respect brought a proud smile to James's face, reminding everyone present of the honor that should always be accorded to those who serve their country. As the initial chaos settled into purpose, it became clear that what had started as a moment of cruelty had transformed into an opportunity for community healing and growth. The morning's events had sparked a change that would ripple far beyond the walls of the supermarket. The store's transformation continued to unfold in remarkable ways. David Fleming, the manager, took immediate action beyond just words. He walked through the store, removing express lane signs and replacing them with new ones that read Priority Lane Veterans, Elderly, and Those Needing Assistance Welcome. The physical change in signage represented a deeper change in store culture. A crowd had gathered around James and Keanu, but instead of the earlier hostile energy, there was warmth and genuine interest. James, finding strength in this new atmosphere, began sharing stories from his time in Vietnam. He spoke of brotherhood, sacrifice, and the importance of looking out for one another. His words carried extra weight now, touching hearts in a way that wouldn't have been possible before the incident. Ayanna's transformation proved particularly moving. After a private conversation with her manager, she emerged from his office with reddened eyes but determined purpose. She approached James again, this time with genuine remorse and understanding. Her apology came not from fear of consequences, but from a place of true comprehension about the impact of her actions. James, demonstrating the grace of his generation, accepted her words with a gentle pat on her hand. The young mother who had tried to help earlier introduced herself as Susan Martinez, a local teacher. Inspired by the morning's events, she asked if James would consider visiting her elementary school to share his experiences with her students. This invitation represented more than just a speaking engagement. It was an opportunity to turn a moment of disrespect into a lesson about dignity for the next generation. Keanu, who had remained present throughout these developments, shared his own thoughts about respect and dignity with the gathered crowd. He spoke not as a celebrity dispensing wisdom, but as someone who had witnessed both the worst and best of human nature in a single morning. His words resonated deeply. Every interaction is a chance to choose kindness over convenience, respect over rushing. The store employees, watching these events unfold, began sharing their own stories. One cashier spoke about her elderly father, another about a brother serving overseas. What had been a workplace divided by schedules and efficiency metrics became a community united by shared experiences and understanding. David Fleming announced that the store would institute a new training program, aptly named Dignity First, mandatory for all employees. Ayanna, in an unexpected turn of events, volunteered to help develop the program, using her experience as a powerful teaching tool. Her willingness to transform her mistake into a lesson for others marked a significant step in her personal growth. The morning's events had created a ripple effect throughout the store. Customers who witnessed the scene began sharing their experiences on social media, not to shame but to highlight the transformation they'd witnessed. The story was becoming one not of public humiliation, but of community redemption and the power of standing up for what's right. The events of that morning reverberated far beyond the supermarket's walls in the days that followed. James Wilson's story, captured on dozens of phones, and shared across social media platforms, touched millions. But unlike many viral moments that flare and fade, this one sparked lasting change. The supermarket's corporate office took notice, implementing the Dignity First program across all their locations nationwide. What began as one store's response to a crisis became a model for customer service training. Ayanna's contribution to the program proved invaluable, her first-hand experience of transformation lending authenticity to the training materials. James found himself at the center of an unexpected community embrace. Regular customers began timing their shopping trips to coincide with his visits, not to stare or praise, but to share moments of genuine connection. The veteran who had once felt invisible now knew every cashier by name, and they knew him. More importantly, they understood him. Keanu's presence that day had catalyzed change, but it was the community's response that gave it permanence. Local veterans groups began partnering with the store for monthly coffee meetings, creating a space where service members could gather and connect. The priority lane became a symbol of respect, its existence reminding everyone that kindness shouldn't be sacrificed for convenience. Susan Martinez's classroom invitation to James yielded beautiful results. The veteran began regular visits to local schools, sharing stories not just of war, but of dignity, respect, and the importance of standing up for others. Children who might have once grown impatient behind someone counting change now understood the story behind the slowness. The security guard, Mike, established a new store protocol for handling similar situations, emphasizing understanding over enforcement. His approach focused on asking, "How can we help?" rather than, "What's the problem?" This simple shift in perspective transformed potential confrontations into opportunities for assistance. David Fleming's leadership during the crisis earned recognition from corporate headquarters, but he measured success differently. The real victory, he often said, was in the small moments. Watching Ayanna help an elderly customer count change, seeing impatient customers choose to wait in the priority lane to show solidarity, hearing laughter and conversation replace hurried silence at the registers. The story's impact reached even further when Keanu mentioned it during a film premiere interview months later. He didn't focus on his own role, but instead spoke about James, about everyday courage, and about how real heroes often stand in quiet checkout lines, asking only for basic dignity in return for their service. 1 year after the incident, the store hosted a community gathering. James was there, surrounded by friends he hadn't known he had before that winter morning. Ayanna, now a full manager and training coordinator, stood beside him as they cut a ribbon for the newly expanded priority lane section. The ceremony wasn't just about a checkout line. It was about a community that had learned to slow down, to see each other, and to understand that every moment of patience is an opportunity for kindness. The morning that began with frost on windows and coldness in hearts ended by warming an entire community. James Wilson's quiet dignity, tested by cruelty, but strengthened by unexpected kindness, became a touchstone for change. His story, amplified by Keanu Reeves' compassionate intervention, reminds us that heroes walk among us every day, some in military uniforms, others in simple winter coats, counting coins at checkout counters. Today, the supermarket stands as a testament to transformation. The priority lane sign gleams under fluorescent lights, but the real change shines in the smiles of cashiers, the patience of customers, and the understanding that every person carries a story worth hearing, a dignity worth protecting. Ayanna's journey from judgment to compassion proves that one moment of realization can redirect an entire life. As James continues his weekly shopping trips, he no longer worries about counting change too slowly. Instead, he counts blessings. The blessing of time given freely, of respect offered naturally, and of a community that learned to measure wealth not in minutes saved, but in dignity preserved. Some say respect must be earned, but that winter morning taught a different lesson. Respect should be given freely, for in honoring others' dignity, we elevate our own humanity.